Welcome to the Body Check-In Assessment. This is a self-help tool to help you understand where you currently are and to use this testing as a baseline to come back and check in throughout your journey to see how your movement potential is changing. So work through each section of this assessment and jot down where you find any particular difficulties or restrictions in each of the different areas. And we're going to be looking at the neck, the rib cage, the pelvis, as well as the shoulders and also the skull motion. And we're just going to be looking at how much movement or what quality of movement do you have in each of the different directions. So use this as a check-in and come back to it later on, reassess, and it's a tool for you throughout your journey to figure out where you are. Trying to understand where the pressure is in your feet can be a really important and useful way to understand what your body is trying to do. So standing with the feet shoulder width apart in a comfortable position. You're going to relax and you can close the eyes if you wish to. And you're just going to try and get a sense of where do you feel pressure in your feet. First of all, is the weight more in the left foot? Or do you feel more pressure in the right foot? We can then think, do I generally have more weight in the front of my feet, in the toes? Do I feel my toes gripping into the ground? Or do I feel all the weight in my heels? Pressure through the heels and the toes not really doing too much. If you find that you've got weight in one side of the foot, try to figure out, even though it's say on the right side, is it on the right side and all in the heel, or is it on the right side and all in the front of the foot? We can then add another layer of complexity and think, if I have the weight all in my right heel, is it all on the outside of my right heel, or do I feel it all the weight on the inside of my right heel? Get a sense of where that pressure is. Don't worry too much because it's just your own subjective evaluation. So just get a sense of what you feel, because we're looking to find out whether or not your understanding of your body changes and whether you feel a difference in that pressure. So it's just important that you get a recognition of what you feel so that then we can take note of it. You may also notice that you feel like you're not very stable and that you're quite wobbly, that perhaps you're either jittering side to side and you kind of feel the weight shifting from left to right, or you feel the weight shifting, you've got a kind of a sway forwards and backwards. And so we can jot that down also. So when you go to mark down where you felt the pressure in your feet, then you've generally got one of 6 options. You either felt the weight all in the left side, or you felt all the way all in your right side. You may have felt all the way in the forefoot and all the pressure was in your kind of toes on both sides, or all the pressure was in the heels on both sides. You may have had a little bit of a mix where the front of the foot on the left and the heel on the right was where you felt pressure, or the front of the foot on the right and the heel on the left was where you felt your pressure. So that's generally how you're going to write it down. And what we'll find as we move on is that each one of these different patterns may correlate with findings higher up the body. Because if I had all of my weight in the front of my foot, well, of course, the rest of my body is going to have to adapt and change. And this is why the understanding of foot pressures can tell us a hell of a lot about what the rest of the body is likely doing and what may need to be done to look to get that in a more even distribution or place. For the neck, we want to check all 6 directions and we want you to compare side to side. So the first thing is, in a slow controlled manner, we're simply going to just extend the neck all the way up to the ceiling and then all the way down.
And we're always noting our two measures. We're noting the quantity of the movement. How far do you feel like you can move it? Is it restricted or not? And then also, what's the quality of the movement? Is it a smooth movement? Or is it a little bit jerky? We're then going to test our rotation to the left and our rotation to the right, comparing side to side. And then we're going to test the tilting of the neck from the ear to the shoulder and the ear to the shoulder. We're then also going to compare the movement of the neck to the skull, which is slightly different. So now think more about what your chin is doing. So I'm going to try to pull my chin in or pull my chin out. Now the kind of bowling ball of the head is rotating on the neck, not the neck itself moving. I can then try to tilt the skull left to right, and that's really as much as we can ask you to do for the skull at the moment. So just write down where you feel your restrictions most, either in quantity or quality. For the rib cage, the first thing we're going to test is our ability to tilt it forwards and backwards. So if we take the rib cage, we want to see how can it tilt forwards and backwards. Now we're never going to move one area without invoking movement elsewhere. But think about first of all that chest bone. So if I was to pull that outwards, this is a backwards tilt of the rib cage, bringing the chest out. If I was to forward tilt, it's as if I've been winded. I'm rounding my rib cage. From the side, you'll get a better sense, pulling it out or tilting it this way. What I'm not doing is bending, because that's just moving my hips, okay? It's just, and many people will struggle to even isolate the rib cage. So that's the first point. Can you even just isolate movement in one place versus another? The second movement then is side to side tilting of the rib cage. And this is not, if you see the difference, this is moving my spine side to side. This is moving my rib cage. Think of it more via what the shoulders are doing. So the rib cage is tilting one way or tilting the other way. The third movement is rotation. And in order to do this, you might want to do it in a sitting position instead, because if you turn your body, you'll find that your hips want to come with you. But as an added test, it's a case of, can I keep my hip bones facing forwards and rotate my upper body? One way versus the other. Can I turn my shoulders? Because now my rib cage is turned, but actually my hips are still where they were. And you're probably going to get a little bit of tension in the mid-back, but we want to try to compare one way versus the other and see what's possible for you. The next set of movements is for the pelvis, or what some people refer to as your hip bones. Okay, so you can feel the top of the pelvis here, whereas the knobbly bits on the side is actually more your femur relating to your hip. So the first thing we want to test is a tilting forwards and backwards. Now many people are going to struggle to even understand this because it's just an alien movement, but nonetheless we need to see if you can do it. So in a standing position, if you were to forward tilt the pelvis, if you imagine if I had a bucket of water, it would be me tilting that bucket of water forward, so water's going to spill out the front. So I'm going to tilt it forwards that way. This is relatively going to arch my low back or give me a bit of a belly. Okay? You're probably going to feel some tension in the low back because we're taking those joints to the extreme of their ability. The opposite, where it's definitely the thing that people struggle with most, is a tucking under, which some people will refer to, of the tailbone coming underneath or an tilting under of the pelvis. Now, from the side, this is forward tilting, and this is backwards tilting. Backwards tilting means I'm rounding my back, or I'm scrunching up here. The front pubis bone is coming up, the tailbone is coming underneath. What that isn't is leaning backwards. So either film yourself or use a mirror or ask someone else, because you probably won't even see yourself doing it. But my main part of my spine stays completely still. And you're probably going to get some, especially in the backwards tilt, some movement at the knees. That's forwards and backwards tilting. If you struggle to do it in standing, try lying on your back, which you're going to see in another video, which is a lot easier to access. Once you get familiar with that movement, come back to standing and reassess, see if you can do it there. The next thing we want to assess is the ability to hike our pelvis, because as much as it can move side to side, it can also shift up and down, which is this movement. So the way that we do this is we keep one knee straight and we bend the opposite. So now this hip bone is dropped and this hip bone is raised. How does that feel? One side compared to the other. Can you do it? Can you not? That obviously then moves us into more of a shift of the pelvis. This is different to a bending of the spine. This is bending my spine and my hips haven't really moved. This is a shift of my pelvis. Think more about moving your weight first all into that left foot or all into the right foot, and you're going to kind of lean away naturally, but my hip bone is moving outside of my foot or outside of my foot, and you're going to feel a stretch on the side, as compared to just moving the spine where there's no change of relative position and the hips stay in line with the feet. That then finally brings us to rotation, where we're taking the hip bones, we're trying to keep the upper part of the rib cage still and just rotating one way or the other way. How is one side compared to the other? Now we're going to assess your shoulders range of motion. And so the first thing we're going to do is simply assess your ability to raise up in front. Now, the ability to know how you do this. So if I come up to here, and then in order to get to the top, I have to lean back, that's no longer your shoulder moving. So just make sure that you're fair and honest to the test, and you just raise up in front and see what you can do, okay? We can then come out to the side, and we're looking for the smoothness, especially with shoulders, because you'll often see a bit of a jerk or a little bit of a jumping up of the shoulder blade, a bit of a hike here, or a leaning away to try and do it. But a pure movement would be to there, where you can reach the ear with some relative comfort. We can then test your ability to rotate up or rotate down. Finally, with the arm out to the side, we want to test your ability to rotate this way. So think about the thumb turning down and the whole, I'm not just doing that, I'm bringing it around as much as because we're trying to test your full extent, one way versus the other. We can even test this in front. Can I rotate here or can I rotate here? What's your ability to do each, both in quantity and quality?